Vanakkam. Welcome to this course on biomedical instrumentation. We have been looking at blood pressure measurement. We looked at direct methods, we looked at indirect methods, we looked at recently we looked at the oscillatory method and the oscillometric method, the advantages and the disadvantages we discussed. From this video onwards, we take a different approach. We start discussing about how to measure body temperature and what are some devices for measurement of temperature. Of course, there is a regular digital thermometer that is available, that is used to measure or to detect presence or absence of fever, that is there. But then we are looking at making this measurement at multiple sites over a relatively long period of time, continuous temperature monitoring at a site of interest, for example, is the biomedical application for us. It's not the, I am not just discussing just the digital thermometer. By the way, that is also a biomedical instrument, but we are more interested in continuous temperature monitoring devices, say in the ICU setting, the biomedical instrumentation device. Of course, the digital thermometer is also such a device, but I am talking about improved accuracy, I am talking about relatively longer term monitoring. Yes. So, what is the need for this? Because it turns out that temperature is a critical measure of the person's health, of a human's health. It gives critical information about the biological or about the physiological state of the person, of the individual. The temperature control is, or the maintenance of temperature within a small range in humans is a relatively complex phenomenon that is perhaps modulated or informed by brain regions such as the hypothalamus and also the interaction with the vascular system. That's a relatively complex phenomenon that is beyond the scope of this course to discuss, but do read up about how thermoregulation is achieved in humans. Now, do read up, it's an exercise for you to read. I am not going to continue with that, but just know that healthy people have temperature within a relatively small range in, I am talking about humans, temperature is maintained in a relatively small range. It is used to evaluate patients in shock. Now, what kind of shock? Thermal shock in this case, thermal shock. And usually infections cause an increase in the body temperature. That is what is a clear indication that there is an infection. If there is an infection, usually the body temperature raises. This is also called as fever. We measure this. Increased, there are multiple things that come into the picture. When there is increased sweat, there is a need for increased ventilation and blood flow. All these are indicative of high fevers. High fever means what? Greater than 102 degree Fahrenheit. High fevers. Usually anesthesia reduces body temperature by thermal regulatory center, which is why if you have ever been, if you or anyone you know has ever been in a local anesthesia surgery, then you will find that the person's body keeps on shivering. If you have been through, I have been through one such surgery wherein I was still conscious, but the surgery was happening. So, I was able to feel that my whole body was shivering because of the effect of anesthesia. In pediatrics, there is a need to stabilize the body temperature of infants, because infants, even normal term infants, have an inability to regulate their body temperature, which is why you need to maintain their temperature using swaddling. Unrelated to biomedical instrumentation, but just some life skill for you. Google and YouTube on how to put a baby in a swaddle. it is a useful life skill for you. Especially if the baby is a preterm baby, then there is a need to maintain the babies within a specific temperature range in an incubator. I already mentioned that there are companies that serve this niche segment. There are Indian companies that produce these devices. One such company is founded by an alumnus of our institute. Do check which one that is. And in arthritis, the temperature of the joints are usually an indication, or the increase in temperature of the joints is an indication of how much inflammation is there. We know what the unit of temperature is. In absolute temperature is 0 degree Celsius is 273 Kelvin, 273.15 Kelvin, and our interest is in the physiological range between 35 and 40 degree Celsius. You are interested only in the relatively healthy range, but of course, if you have it wider, then you can measure for hypothermia. What is hypothermia? When the body temperature suddenly drops. For example, when the person is exposed to cold water or cold environment, snow, cold, frozen environments, suddenly, in such cases, hypothermia, and the resolution of interest is about 0.1 degree Celsius and accuracy is about 0.1 degree Celsius. Now, what is the difference between resolution and accuracy? We discussed that in one of the first few weeks. Do check the difference between resolution and accuracy. The most popular, the regular method of measuring temperature is by using mercury thermometer. Now, this is becoming out of vogue, not so popular nowadays. Earlier it was used, nowadays not popular because of the possibility of mercury poisoning. Mercury getting leaked, getting poisoned. The mercury is a dangerous toxic chemical that is not being used nowadays. Nowadays, electronic thermometers, the digital thermometers are the ones that are used, and most of these use thermistors, and usually these thermistor probes can also measure temperature within the esophagus, inside the rectum, on the surface of the skin, percutaneous, subcutaneous, just below the surface of the skin, and temperature within a muscle, for example, and temperature in a vein, for example. So, thermistors probes can be really small that they can measure temperature at multiple points. Thermocouples also can be really small that they can be used to measure surface body temperature and several other points. The other is the so called RTD, or the resistance temperature detector, or the resistance thermometer, frequently used for measuring body surface temperature and rectal temperature measurement. What is now becoming more and more popular is the non-contact temperature measurement system. This non-contact means infrared based temperature measurement system. So, these are radiation based methods that rely on a couple of physical laws for their function. What are the laws? Planck's law and Stefan Boltzmann's law. What are these laws? Beyond the scope of this course, to explain the physics of how this works, do check how this works. So, the thermistor and RTD usually measure the absolute temperature, whereas the thermocouple measures temperature relative to a reference temperature. So, that means that if you have a thermocouple, you need to have another measure of temperature that is used to measure the reference temperature. Right. So, with this we come to the end of this video. In this video, we looked at how or why measurement of body temperature is important, critical, and how is it a critical measure of biomarker of health, and what are the devices that can be used to measure temperature of the body. For example, we looked at thermistor, RTD, thermocouples, and we also discussed or mentioned non-contact temperature measurement systems. Right. With this, we end this video. Thank you very much for your attention.